everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to Above the Line, where tradition meets innovation, a podcast brought to you by the Holt Meadow Group. Today is our second episode, and it's entitled The New Blueprint. We're very excited to bring this episode to you. We've got two guests joining us in the studios today. Both are very tenured in their respective fields, and we're blessed and honored to have them here. Today, we're really digging deep in discussing what changes that are going on right now in our multifamily landscape with purpose-built rentals here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and really the country at large. Make no mistake about it, a shift is happening. We are seeing it right now. We're seeing a shift in modern times on many fronts, but specifically with our rental stock here in Toronto and the new ways of managing them because of the new demands and the new expectations of our emerging generation to come. We get into a lot of fun here at the Holt Meadow Group on these podcasts. We have some things at the end for our guests, which they don't know yet, and we haven't told them. We have a wacko wheel that we like to spin and have destiny land on its chance of wherever it lands. And those are the questions that we're going to pose to our guests who have had no prep time whatsoever because they don't know the questions. And I've made certain of that. So please join me in welcoming our guests to today's show, where we are about to tee it high and let it fly. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome again to Above the Line, where tradition meets innovation. This is our second episode called The New Blueprint. And today we are blessed to be joined in studio with Mr. David Price from SVN Rock Advisors and the one and the only Daniela Douglas, our Senior Vice President of Operations from Holt Meadow Group. Before I get into introductions and things of that nature, which we will get to in due time, I'd like to play a little game here with our guests who travel from different parts of the city to come here to meet with us here at 1990 Studios in North York, Yonge and Sheppard. And we call it Toronto Traffic. So, Dave, we're going to start with you. How was your drive in and where'd you come from?
Nice. Thanks, Matt. I'm doing well. Made it here safely. I'm coming from Waterdown, but funny you ask. So I did take the 407, but what I did was I just turned the car on autopilot, went to sleep, and I showed up here safe and sound. But people tell me traffic was not that great.
All right. Well, listen, autopilot has its benefits, I'm sure.
I didn't actually. Okay.
Thank God.
No, the traffic was good coming on the 407.
Okay. So we got 407. Daniela, how about you?
Well, good morning, Matt. Nice to be here with you and, Dave. Appreciate, the invitation. Yeah. I'm coming from Ajax, and unlike my friend Dave here, I took a 401, the parking lot. And in my anticipation for a 10 a.m. traffic, I was hoping for cruising, to the studio. Surprise, surprise. The traffic was the same as the one at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. So, no autopilot for me. I had to be a Formula One driver to be here on time. But I'm here. It's all good.
Welcome to both of you, and thank you both for getting here. And I think what we'll get away from this is we probably should have kept the 407, but selling it might have been a mistake. But anyway, yes, on the 401, there is no such thing as rush hour. It's always rush hour. And
glad you made it.
Yeah, we're glad you made it. So thank you for making it in here, Daniela. And by way of introductions, we did mention we have Dave Price from SVN Rock Advisors. David has been in this space for over 25 years. He's the director of sales for SVN Rock Advisors. Dave has a very, very eclectic past. He's well-versed with an enormous toolkit working with developers across the board, but now mainly with purpose-built rental multifamily developers. Dave does feasibility studies. He really is the guy that gets in and helps you understand how to value the asset, what to do and how to do it. So we're blessed to have him here with us today. But what you
Thanks for having me.
Don't know about Dave Price is... Dave, tell us something we don't know about you.
Okay, well, this is throw myself under the bus time. So what you don't know about me is I'm a closet singer. And what I mean by closet singer is when I do that at home, The kids, my wife, they try to put me in the closet, right? The eyes roll. Okay. So, but my wife actually is a singer, but I like to dabble in the house only. The other thing is I'm kind of a hockey geek, so I love stats, and every night I'm checking into who did what and when and how and why. So I'm a numbers guy.
Dave, Oilers or Florida?
Oh, you're not going to like my answer.
Let's hold that. We're staying true to Canadian. Go Oilers.
Absolutely. Go
Florida,
Oilers.
Florida looks scary. I agree with you. And Daniela Douglas. Daniela joins us today. She's the Senior Vice President of Operations with the Holt Meadow Group, a third-party asset manager, property manager, and a complete property service provider. Prior to joining Holt Meadow, Daniela was Director of Asset Management with Starlight for over 3 years. And prior to that, Daniela comes from a long history at CapREIT, where Daniela spent over 11 years there and was the Senior Director of Operations. Daniela has overseen portfolios in excess of 5,000 units, and we're blessed to have her here with us today in studio, sharing her knowledge and insight with all of you about the management and running of these wonderful multifamily assets. But what you don't know about Daniela is Daniela.
Thank you, Matt, for the wonderful introduction. I am so happy to be here with my good, friend, Dave. Daniela Douglas, the person, who is she? It's a mother of two that likes to have tradition with her children. One which is, picking your own strawberries in summer with my children. And when the work is getting to me, I like to do arts and crafts, which is a way for me to wind down and relax and recharge.
Decompress, right? Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Right. Yes.
Strawberries. That is, you know what? I'm going to hit you up for some jam.
Oh, my hand is in the air.
Yeah,
as well.
we're all on that, Daniela.
Well, let's say that, my expertise goes as far as picking the strawberries. Whatever goes beyond that, it's a whole different story. So.
Okay, duly noted. But thank you. So
I'll let you test first.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that.
I think that's going to be a passing game between the two of you.
It could be pickled, but we're okay with it. So listen, guys, we do have some questions that we'd like to get to, for both of you here. And one of the questions we had was, it's for both of you to chime in on, okay? What do you think is the single greatest change that you are seeing within our multifamily sector right now? Dave, we'll start with you.
Okay, sounds good. I would have to say a lot of people would talk about government policy incentives being offered. I'm going to say that that's probably we're still a little bit early to see the effects of that. I think the greatest change that we're seeing at SVN Rock is condo developers pivoting into rentals. Massive change. Now there's a change in ideology and there's a change in a mindset when you make that shift. But condo developers,
they're different businesses, right? So
absolutely, completely different. And I think a couple of years ago, maybe those condo developers didn't understand the differences between the two.
That's interesting.
And I think now they're starting to get it. So we all know in the GTA that the condo sales are flat.
Yeah,
putting a real stress on those programmatic condo developers. We're getting a lot of programmatic condo developers coming to us asking us, how do we make that pivot and do it successfully, right? And one of the key things that they've got to shift in is knowing and understanding that you're now an owner-operator. You've got to think about property management. You got to think about the lease up. It's very different than pre-selling condos. So a lot of stress out there, a lot of uncertainty, and that's part of, I think, what this group is all about, is filling those gaps and taking the uncertainty away and making sure those condo developers have the resources, the data, the information they need to make that pivot, look at those pro formas and see them pencil out, and then go secure their financing.
No, that's
right?
Listen, that is you're bang on, and thank you for that. That's a great tidbit. I want to back up, though, for one second. You mentioned that there were governmental changes and policy changes. Very important to our industry. Don't want to glaze over that. You don't have to get into the weeds on it, but give me an example of what one of these changes might have been that we still haven't maybe fully seen the results or the effects of that.
Well, I think if you go back maybe just over a year, the federal government announced a massive $1 billion incentive program called the Housing Accelerator Fund.
Right.
Now that's administered by CMHC, and it takes time for that money to flow down into the municipalities where it's going to get deployed on projects. We did see that last spring that London was the first community that got allocated funds. I think they've got 72 million at their disposal. And now it's a process of rolling it out. And, ultimately that money is for the purposes of getting housing built sooner and at higher densities, right? But how do you tie the two together, and how do you get it into the hands of developers and projects?
Well, that's
that
always been
the
the crux, right?
And why I say we haven't seen the results of that is just because those projects are now just starting to move forward. So that's a waiting game still, but that's one example. And then you've got the infrastructure fund, that the $6 billion infrastructure fund that has been announced, and it's up to the governments to get together, partner together, basically try to come up with an agreement of how they're going to spend the funds. So you've got $1 billion for the municipalities, you've got $5 billion allocated to the provinces. But you see in the wording when you read up on it and you listen in, it's agreements need to be made between the levels of government. That's always been a challenge.
Very interesting at these particular times when we're staring down an election coming up next year as well, right?
So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Daniela, how about for you? What are some of the biggest changes you're seeing right now in the multifamily sector on your side of things?
I'm not going to touch on the economics and policies, which, Dave, summarized such, with such eloquence. I'm going to talk about, the mentality of the renter today. That's a drastic change in today's market.
That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
So what do I mean by that? Today's renter, it's no longer looking for just, an apartment. Today's renter is looking for a way to live. It's a lifestyle where, the size of the unit is not as important as it used to be in the past. They see the whole, asset as an extension of their, living quarters. Amenities are becoming more and more a need rather than a perk. Technology is no longer a perk; it's also a need. The dynamic on the rental market has changed, where
Gen
millennials, downsizers, Gen Z. What's the next generation after the millennials?
It's Gen Z.
Gen Z.
Yeah.
They look at life from a different perspective, with a different lens. Therefore, that's quite a change. So to Dave's point, condo builders, they are pivoting, to the rental market and bringing, the element of, amenities and services, that are provided and were provided in the past in the condo world. They are starting, to come a necessity into the rental industry.
So amenitization is what you're seeing is becoming more prevalent and more relevant to the buying or the leasing appetite of today's tenant, I guess.
Absolutely. And COVID was a good example of situations that can impact a lifestyle, a way how we operate. Prior to COVID, everyone was in the office, working, from the office Monday to Friday, or whatever schedule each company had. COVID introduced the idea of working from home. Now, being, in a smaller space, it taught us that that comes with certain expectation from the renter, where they were looking, to have a party room where they could have, book, and obviously with, the proper scheduling, they would reserve their time and, have, that removal, from the day-to-day tasks. So that's becoming more the norm of today's market.
So thank you for that. That's very interesting, because we will delve into that a little bit later. So let's put that to the back of our heads for a second, because I completely agree with you. I think that is what is changing in the industry for PBR as well, where maybe amenities weren't the focus before, but certainly I think you're right, they are becoming more so.
Matt, do you mind if I interject on that point? Do we have time for that?
Chris, how are we doing on we got on yeah, we're good on time. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. So that shift, and Daniela, I'm really glad you brought that up. I totally agree with that shift. But in terms of amenitization by the developers themselves, I mean, in my humble opinion, I think that's been a big mistake all these years, where condo developers have done a nice job with a nice hotel experience when they come in the front door, and it's a nice lobby with some nice amenities. It should be the other way around. You've got all of that old stock rentals out there that are very under amenitized.
Right.
And, the amenities are what sell the building. And it has to, on a rental with the turnover, you need a great experience, right? So especially in today's environment with interest rates up, and it's harder for developers to get projects off the hump.
Very true.
You've got to go after top of markets in order to make the financials work, and you're not going to be able to do that without proper amenitization. But it also has to be tagged properly to who your target renters are.
Absolutely.
So knowing who they are.
Demographics, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But to Daniela's point, the shift is on with all of the different demographic types, that amenities are becoming a mandatory requirement of a new construction apartment, right?
So they're demanding it.
Absolutely. So we're going to see that shift. Now, if you look at developers down in the States, they're much more, no offense, but they're much more advanced and developed and understand the experience
100%.
Down there.
Yeah.
Amenities drive rent. Right, and now the Canadian developers are starting to tap into that, almost because the market is demanding it. So
that is really interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for that interjection.
Sure.
We're going to park that there. We're going to move on to our next question, actually. And Daniela, this is a question for you. What are some examples of new ways of managing a multifamily asset in today's changing market that maybe weren't done 10 years ago or 20 years ago? What do you do differently from a management perspective now that maybe you didn't see being done then?
There were quite a bit of changes in the way how you would manage a building today. So if you really look at your property as strictly a building, then you are leaving elements on the table, because you need to look at the building as an asset. Ultimately, it's an asset, and you need to shift and to adapt to the market conditions. Very important is to be relevant and staying current. And the idea is, how can you be relevant and be current when you are competing with your peers, that everyone is kind of doing the same thing. So Holt Meadow, we actually look at each building's identity and brand.
Isn't that interesting? Okay.
Because if you look at the asset has a life of its own, right? As much as it's just, brick and mortar, it has a life of its own. This asset, it's housing humans, and we all have our different needs. If you go with, the approach that, I have a portfolio, this is my marketing strategy, this is my customer service, and I'm going to roll it out, without understanding that each asset has, that identity, has a brand, and all that it's tied into your market. To Dave's point, if you don't know and you don't understand your demographic and your market, you're going to be offbeat.
Yeah.
Why? You are setting rental rates that will not reflect the brand, that will not reflect what you can achieve, whether they are overpriced or underpriced. So each asset has to be reviewed on its own. You have to dedicate, that time and attention and treat it as a single entity, not as a portfolio.
You know what? That's really interesting, Daniela. I was, Dave, I think we had a conversation about this before. I noticed this when I was on the condo side. I was in Miami, down in South Beach. And this was back in 2009, 2010, 2011. So this is, dating myself here, but 14, 15 years ago. And I always felt that the Americans, our American cousins to the south, did a wonderful job of each condo building down there in that particular spot having its own like brand, its own identity. It was like a vertical city, and they had, we have gotten better at that here in Toronto. Like we have, King Street has Lavelle. They have like nightclubs. They have pools. They're trying to have their own vibe and their own brand in that condo building, and I think Daniela's spot on. And to your point, rental buildings need to have that as much, if not more, than the condo. And I think our old stock, as you call it, Dave, didn't achieve that. And I think that from a management perspective, Daniela at Holt Meadow Group, I think they've got the secret sauce on what that is. If you could translate that to how you manage that building and what kind of culture you create, I think you've got something that you're cooking with gas there. I think that's right.
Yeah, I think, all of that is done in the planning phases, right? Well before you bring people into the building. First of all, you have to understand your demographic, who they are, potential renters, before you can start putting together a program of branding the asset, and then putting a property management style that suits the community that you're working towards building. If you don't do that planning up front, you're going to be behind the eight ball when it comes time, and you're going to miss the mark. So, it is shifting. We're seeing that shift start. It's still in the early, it's still in its infancy in Canada, but it's coming along.
So, Dave, when you were saying you had to do it in the early stages, are we talking about like site plan approval, like application stages? Like, is that how early?
Absolutely. As you're working towards site plan approval, you need to be doing the feasibility study to figure out who's there. It's at that time that you're going to engage, or a lot of developers don't. We're pushing them into identify who your property management group is going to be, but do it smartly and strategically. Somebody that understands all of these aspects have to fall into place and work together. So you want to engage a smart property management group that can start with working with a marketing company or your internal resources to develop that brand, and start that from the planning phases. You're going to know who your demographic is early on, and you want to know that before site plan approval, because otherwise, what are you working towards? It's thumb in the air, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, very much so.
Get your planning done in advance. Pick your property management group at that same time, and work with them throughout the entire planning process through site plan approval, right up to and including when you're starting to bring people into
lease
the building.
up, and
that's your lease up component.
Yeah.
And if you're working with the same group all the way through, it's harmonious. Your messaging stays intact. You can teach and train to, and again, I'm preaching to the choir here. This is exactly what you guys do. But you have to do it. This is, from a developer's perspective, there's too much money at risk and on the table here. And if you don't plan properly in the early phases and align yourself with the right people, you're going to leave chips on the table. And in today's environment, you may actually lose money in the short term.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Here at Holt Meadow Group, we have a service we provide that's almost like an insurance policy to our developer friends called RMI, which is our Rental Market Integration Program, where we do come in on those stages at after entitlement or during entitlement, before SPA, and we opine on the level of finishes in the building. We opine on where the placement of the management offices are. All these other finite, nuanced differences that you may not expect would be a problem because you've built 1 billion condos before, so it should be the same on a purpose-built rental. But guess what? It's not.
No
and
way.
That's what I think, if I'm reading it right, you're kind of speaking to, and I'm happy to say that at Holt Meadow, that is a service that we do offer. So
well, and it's important to know you guys are agile, because Daniela's point is every property is different and needs to take on its own identity, even if you're only a couple blocks away from another site, because we get that all the time at SVN Rock. You know, it's close enough, right? It should be the same data. Can't
but
we
it's
just
not.
No,
it's
not.
not. Right.
Yeah.
I would like, to add that not only the new assets that are in the process of being built should receive, this attention. The majority of our rental stock, it's the older assets.
Correct. What do you do then, Daniela?
So I don't want, the owners of the older, assets to be discouraged and feel that there is no recourse for them. Because when you have a property operator, I actually like to call property operators, not property managers. I think, it's part of the evolution of the market where you really operate, the asset. So when you have a property operator that is creative, versatile, and knowledgeable, they will have the ability to look at your existing asset and come up with ideas and ways of adding an amenity. May not be at the same level as a brand new asset, but there is something that today's market is expecting.
Right.
Not only that you start, to reposition your asset, now you start, to also add value. Because think about, the also the investment that you'll have in this, asset where you would value it at a certain, dollar amount without an amenity. And by investing, some capital in it, you would bring, a different, value to the asset.
That's a great point.
So it's really, you are repositioning, your asset with the resources, that you have at hand. So it's not only about, the new build. David's absolutely right. Early in the stages is critical. But older assets, do not be discouraged, and just, look at the right person to provide you with the right information and suggestions.
That is, guys, we could talk forever on this.
Yes,
I'm sorry. We will continue this more, but I do have to get to our other questions, and I have to get to listeners' emails, and I've got a whole program to go through here. So, Dave, this question is for you, my friend. When doing a feasibility study for a client, how critical is the management's ability to handle turnover? It's a two-part question, so that's the first part. Second part is, what strategies, Dave, do you feel good management typically employs when looking at this turnover? In other words, what to you would be healthy turnover versus bad vacancy?
Okay, so that's there's a lot of meat on
loaded
those
question.
bones. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the we talked a little bit earlier about in the planning phases, you need to do a feasibility study to understand who you're building the building for, right? Because we're not necessarily going to live in there. So our opinion, no disrespect, doesn't matter that much. You got to know who's going to be in the building. You're doing the feasibility study really to teach the developer how to build a better building for that specific site so they can optimize the value of it. Right, you're trying to pump up the rents, get the highest net operating income, so that the value of the building is naturally higher.
Right.
So, from a management's ability to control turnover and handle turnover,
Yes.
if the owner or the developer hasn't brought in property management yet, they need to do so. If they're handling it on their own in the early phases, the best way to handle turnover is to build the building properly in the first place. Use the data, use the numbers, and then, at SVN Rock, so it's absolutely about having great quality data and from multiple sources, and then it's using our experience, we've had 38 years in the business to know how to interpret the data and make smart recommendations to the developer for the purposes of optimizing the value.
Right.
You got to drive up the rents. So if you do it right in the first place, you're setting yourself up for
success later.
The second piece of that is and twofold. So talking about handling turnover. So we always talk about the fact that driving rent has 4 components, and I'll jump right to the number 4, and it's not in priority order, it's property management, right? So it's about having knowledgeable staff, trained up well, understand the brand to your point, and understand the community. So you're servicing them well. That opening experience, that welcome experience, even during the lease up, right? Doing that initial tour, that's the first time a prospect is going to come and meet you, meet your team, and see what kind of quality of individuals are actually managing the building.
Right.
That has a big factor in turnover in general. How do you handle that? Well, you service them well, right? And it seems obvious to say, but it needs to be reiterated for sure.
Okay.
And so
good healthy turnover versus bad vacancy.
Okay, so healthy turnover to us. So when you're looking at a new build, right? And this is normal. When I say this to developers, they kind of shudder when I say this. It's normal to get upwards of 30% turnover in the first year after occupancy.
Wow.
And that's just, it takes time for the target demographic to settle into the building.
Okay.
So because we have such a gap between supply and demand, and our, in the GTA, there's such a lack of new construction, well amenitized buildings that are managed well.
Oh yeah.
So
we got a whole show on that.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
When one comes online, it sticks out like a sore thumb.
For sure.
The prospects rush to that building, and if the experience that they get when they arrive there matches the expectations, then you're that much further ahead.
And that's the property service provider you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Right? Got it.
So now, from a perspective of so 30% can be expected in the first year. So it takes till about year 3 to 4 for the target demographic to settle in the building. Mm-hmm. If you're managing the building well, servicing your clients well, and everything is aligned with the people that are now in the building, that turnover is going to shrink down to single digits.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are you, 5%, 7%, Dave?
You're looking anywhere from 5 to 9% on turnover.
Okay.
And that's healthy turnover.
Okay.
And as a property management group and as a developer, if you're doing a good job, your turnover by about year 4 should be in that range.
Got it.
If you haven't dipped below 10% after the 4th year,
something's wrong.
Something's wrong. But your indicators are going to be there in year 2 and year 3, right?
Yeah.
So if you're thinking 30% year 1, you want that coming back to about 20% in year 2, then maybe 12% in year 3. And again, those are rough numbers, but you'll get the
And we're
markers.
talking, rule of thumb at large.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I know it's all a case-by-case basis. I understand that.
Right.
But
Yeah, set off the hop. I'm a numbers guy, right? You have to do your trend analysis. Don't take your eye off the ball. And as a developer, you've got so many things to think about.
Right.
Third-party
Right.
property management just makes sense, right? Bring them in. They are the experts. Let them handle it, but make sure they're aligned with your objectives. And then you'll see that turnover start to minimize. So build it right in the first place. You set yourself up for success.
Yeah.
And then on the other side is make sure property management is in place and watch your numbers.
Got it. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I know we could talk about this all day, but
Daniela,
I promised Chris that we would keep going.
I don't have time to chime in, so
I have a segment of the show where we actually, believe it or not, we have listeners and we have viewers. We love you all, and they send us emails actually of questions that they would like me to ask our guests. So with that, I am going to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, and thanks for not divulging what the questions were in advance.
No, I promised our guests that they would remain anonymous. The questions, of course. The guests won't. So Alina from Toronto writes in, given the significant shift in workplace dynamics following the COVID-19 pandemic, many cities are seeing a trend of converting office spaces into residential apartments. from your perspective as both a property service provider and a feasibility analyst, what are the key factors driving this trend? And do you anticipate it will impact urban housing markets here in Toronto in the coming years?
Oh, I can jump all over that one. Do you mind if I go first?
Okay.
First.
No, I went first last time.
Ladies
so
first. We're going to start with Daniela.
So it's thank you, Alina from Toronto, for your question.
Thank you, Alina. Yes.
Quite interesting question, and the answer actually it's quite complex as well. Converting an office space into a multi-residential space takes a lot of planning, and it has to be done in the right space. It's very important to identify if that office tower has the bones to support the conversion.
Interesting.
Because again, an office space has certain requirements, and living space has completely different requirements. So if you have an office tower that it's all glass around,
right,
and you have just one drain line, think about the logistic nightmare, the cost. So it takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of financial investigation, because at the end of the day, in order to retrofit a building, it's quite a big investment, and can be done. So Dave, if you want to jump in and
just before you jump in, to give Alina from Toronto credit, we are seeing that in pockets now, and in test pockets, if I'm not mistaken, in Vancouver, or out sub-markets of Vancouver and Calgary, actually. And I think we can all agree here that the office market has taken quite a beating after the pandemic, and vacancy levels. I mean, I'm hearing reports in some buildings where they're 30, 40, 50% vacant, if not more. So is there any credence or viability to this question from Alina from Toronto?
100%. This is a massive topic, and one that there's a lot of pain there, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of owners that have got office space that is sitting empty, and Matt, some of those are north of 50% vacancies.
Wow.
And
wow,
it's crushed. The pandemic has really crushed the office market properties that are out there. Now, to Daniela's point, to do a conversion, right? You've got this building that was purpose-built for office space.
Right.
And you've got washrooms that are strategically placed on each given floor. And now what are you going to do with that? And how do you incorporate it? And how do you retrofit it?
Right.
And not all offices are good candidates to do a conversion into a multifamily rental. Only because, people think, well, it's already an existing structure. What's the big deal? Throw up a couple of walls and you've got yourself a rental apartment. Well, that's not the case.
No.
Sometimes it takes more capital, more resources to retrofit than it does just to knock it down and do it right from the
Isn't that
from
crazy?
the get-go.
Wow.
So, but that's from the eyes of somebody that's looking at it from, I don't own the property, right? And I get it. You've invested a lot into this property to be an office building, and it takes a lot of capital to repurpose it. So you've really got to weigh out, have I got a property that's conducive to do so? Because you may end up spending more money to try to retrofit it. And again, purpose-built rentals is named that way for a reason. Purpose-built
rentals.
An existing structure is not necessarily thinking about who's going to rent in this building. They're thinking about the office and the office staff. Right. They're not thinking about the family or the individual that needs a conducive space.
That's a valid point.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of them. We've seen a lot of owners of office buildings do the conversion regardless because they have to do something.
That's right.
So, we can help them to optimize it, but you are limited in terms of what you can do.
To Alina's point, though, I think this is a conversation that has been coming up increasingly, and it's coming up more and more, and I think it's going to continue to come up more
for years
as we embark on this housing shortage, which clearly I think we all agree around this table we have. and we have these vacant assets in key priority locations on transit in these areas. I mean, you have councillors now at City of Toronto that are actually discussing this. So this will be something I think that we're all going to watch very intently going forward. So how would you answer Alina from Toronto's last question, which is, do you see it happening here in Toronto?
I believe it will. Maybe not at a larger scale as someone would think, not en masse. There are buildings that can be converted. So there is success. There is a conversion that happened in Ottawa not long ago. You mentioned, Vancouver and, Alberta. So there are success stories. So the answer is yes, it will happen, but it's all about at what scale.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's already happening. I think we're going to see that trend grow, even here in Toronto. And I think, I feel for those owners. It's tough. If they could have, if they could have or would have built it in the first place as a rental, they wouldn't be in this position today. And again, we need office space. Don't get me wrong. There's different asset classes that are absolutely necessary. But I think, to your point, in government, they need to be talking about it more. They need to find ways to incentivize developers to go through and do the conversion.
Agreed.
And help them out, because those are, we have just an incredible shortage of housing. It's a crisis, and you've got thousands, millions of square foot of empty office space that can easily be converted. Well, easily, but not so cheaply converted.
Theoretically easily, but without the proper mechanics and relief being made available to make it feasible. That's another conversation.
It's about the finances, right? Because there's lots of people that say, if you want me to go and do it, I'll put a hammer in my hand and go fix it for you. But who's going to pay for that?
Right.
And
so look, this blends in. This leads into another conversation, which we're not even going to go there, because we'll be here. Work from home, is it here to stay? Is it like, we're not going there? Because I do have another question for you both that I have to ask, and this is from Sana from Toronto. She writes in, "Hi Matt, love the show." Thank you, Sana. We love you too. What are some of the most common challenges faced by owners and managers of older multifamily assets or buildings? And what are some of the innovative strategies that a prudent property manager would use for renovating and upgrading or updating these older multifamily buildings? Daniela, we'll start with you.
Hi, Sana from Toronto. Thank you for your question. Existing assets, older stock assets, are competing with increased utility cost, operating cost, which it's obviously driving the operating expenses to levels of, around, 40 to 45%.
Wow.
So
40 to 45%. That's what
right.
We're seeing OPEX budgets hit.
That's right, on the older
Wow.
buildings. So now, as a property owner, you need to be relevant and to attract the right clientele for your asset.
Right.
You need to focus on maximizing your rents. And with a rent control in place that is applicable to those assets, your recourse may be filing an AGI.
What is an AGI, Danielle?
It's an above guideline increase, where by investing, a capital in your asset, you have the ability to apply with the landlord and tenant board and request, the board to approve you an increase that it's greater than the guideline approved by the government. Those applications are lengthy, and it takes time to be heard, process. So recovering some of your capital expenditure, it's gonna take some time.
Does that go through the landlord tenant board, the LTB, or?
The landlord and tenant board must, have approval from the landlord and tenant board before it's officially in place.
Okay.
However, that should not discourage anyone to look at this option. Have a creative property operator that will recommend amenitizing, the space. Look at underutilized spaces that will be sitting, there. Nobody will use it, and think about what you can convert it, to something to offer your residents. Customer service in a number of years, the notion of customer service in the rental residential became more of a concept than something that's, applicable. Invest in having well-trained staff.
Interesting.
When you have knowledgeable professionals that are working, at your asset, they are an extension and representation of your brand. As much as you have an older building, that doesn't prevent you from having, an identity and a brand for it. So thinking that, it is what it is, and, status quo on what I have.
And that's what a lot of, I think, multifamily owners feel and think of older assets, right? They just...
It's a deterrent, and that's gonna actually make you being left behind. You'll be left behind by the trends.
Yeah.
You'll be left behind by the market, and it may be sustainable. The approach may be sustainable for a period of years, but there is always a catch up, right? Life always catches up with everything, and that goes with the asset. So be strategic as an operator. You have to be strategic. So some of the challenges for the older asset is that how can I be strategic about my asset? What can I do to also be relevant, to be competitive with my new peers? Right. So that's a challenge that I see.
Okay.
And
thank you for that, Dave. I see you want to jump on this, but I have a second part of the question that was directed to you.
Okay.
So
sure.
I'm going to have to ask you to hold that for a second.
You got
it. Sana writes, David, how do you this is a key one. Being on the feasibility side, looking at numbers, Sana's wondering, how do you as an owner of a multifamily asset prioritize which improvements you make first in a reno project or an upgrading or updating this project?
So that could be answered in a number of different ways. So great question. I think what you have to do is first understand as an owner and operations management company, and first of all, those two need to be in alignment. But you have to understand who you are, right? And talking about branding. Because to prioritize without understanding that, you're just kind of shooting darts at a dartboard with a blindfold on. It's so who you are, who's in the building, and then service them to their needs. So you could do things like, and Daniela, you probably do this all the time, is query your audience and find out what's important to them,
like
what's
tenant
bothering
surveys
them.
Or
exactly.
Right.
Do a survey, figure out where their pain points are, but also don't just unilaterally make decisions to spend capital on renovations. You have to also align it with your objectives as the developer on that property.
Right.
So, and why I say that, it's really important that, when you look at, and I call it the old stock, it's all of those buildings that were built back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which still today represents, I think, still about 80 to 82% of all rental units.
Much, really?
Yeah,
still,
really? That's right.
So
wow,
this is going to change slowly now as developers start bringing more new construction.
Well, they start to pivot too, right?
Exactly. So we're going to get that competition now, and you're going to have to start looking at who are we in the market and who do we want to be.
Right.
So to answer that question directly, then you're going to understand who you are, what the needs and the demands of your current residents are, and then start allocating your budget to whether it's, and I highly, highly recommend looking at where you have vacancies and empty space, to your point, to figure out how to amenitize the building. Start bringing that in, but don't do it to a level that's out of sync with your brand and who you are.
Absolutely.
So when we look at...
well, that's the kiss of death, though, if you do that, right? Like,
well,
that's just... Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as you've got new buildings coming to the market, we have a mandate in the country to bring affordable housing to the marketplace. In my mind, all of that old stock is going to become the affordable housing from an affordable standpoint, right? There's multiple definitions of affordable.
That's right.
Now, pick your path. Are you going to be on the low end? Well, keep your amenities, start amenitizing, but keep them on the low end and allocate smaller amounts of space to that because it'll keep your capital costs down.
Right.
But then listen to who's in there. Is it in-suite upgrades that are needed? Do we need to put in air conditioners? Do we need to, what do we need to fix?
Right.
And then figure out how much it's going to cost and then allocate it, right? So as units turn over, that's the time to do the renovations, but know what kind of renovations you want to do in advance and how much it's going to cost. So you're not just sort of making knee-jerk reactions.
Throwing a dart at the dartboard, eh?
Yeah, because you're going to spend 20, 30, 50 grand to renovate a unit. But maybe that wasn't the significant need. Maybe it was good enough based on who you are as a property. So,
well, this is a great segue. So I have to interject here. Dave, thank you for that. Daniela, thank you for everything. I'd love to spend more time, but Chris is kind of nudging me along, and we got to go. We have what a lot of listeners and people are waiting for this moment, and we're going to now unveil our inaugural Wacko Wheel. This is a game. We're playing the Wacko Wheel, where
Matt,
Dave.
what are you doing to us?
Well, it's going to be a lot of fun. I can tell you that.
Okay.
So I'm going to just explain to you guys what the Wacko Wheel is. I'm going to tell the folks at home and everyone watching what the Wacko Wheel is. Here at Holt Meadow Group, we don't believe in leaving it to chance. Just like you don't believe in renovating ad nauseum without knowing your market, because it's like throwing a dart on a dartboard or spinning the wheel, the Wacko Wheel. So we have a game here that we like to play with our guests at the end of the show, and we'd invite you and Daniela to play this game with us. Dave, you okay with that?
It's been a long time since I played Spin the Wheel.
Daniela?
I'm all for it. Let's do it.
So we have a wheel that we spin here. Chris, our producer in our studio, is going to spin this wheel, and that little black dot there, that arm that's the arm of destiny. Wherever this wheel ends and lands, that will point to whatever piece of the pie you're going to play. We have 4 categories. We have whodunit, 2 truths and a lie, the blame game, and flip a coin. Now, these are the rules for these games. Flip a coin is I'm going to read you something that a politician or someone famous or a city ordinance or something that was recently brought into legislation, and you're going to get 30 seconds each we'll give you a minute, all right? That might be tough for you, Dave, and you, Daniela, me as well.
Thank you.
So I'll give you guys a minute each, and you'll have to argue a pro or a con, sight unseen, for that thing.
We pick or?
No, I choose.
Oh,
who's the
okay.
pro and who's the con?
So we are kind of, debating on opposite sides.
Yes. You two will debate each other without ever knowing what the question was or anything else like that.
Okay.
That's flip a coin. 2 truths and a lie. I'm going to read 3 statements to you guys, and I'm going to ask you both, separate from each other, to choose which of the 3 are 2 truths and which of the 3 is a lie. Okay?
Yep.
Whodunit? I'm going to read you something and ask you to opine as to who do you think said that or did that, and was it a good thing? There's no right or wrong answer. It's just what you think. Then we have the blame game. It's a little bit similar.
That's easy.
Okay.
Blame the other person.
And I am not to blame for this.
Oh, okay.
I'll
That's
let you know at home.
Different,
I'm only a
discussion.
conduit that brings this to you. I'm as innocent as a newborn babe. So.
So he said.
Uh-huh. So, Chris, if you would, let's spin our Wacko Wheel.
Here we go. I'm not sure which one I'd prefer here.
Interesting.
Flip
We're gonna
a coin.
Pros
All
and
right.
cons, okay.
Does anyone have a coin on them?
Oh, man.
In today's world, everything is about automation. So the answer is we have debit cards.
Oh, well,
So-
let's flip the debit card.
Let's flip the debit card.
We actually don't have a coin on us here in the studio. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just read Okay, we're going to leave this to chance.
Okay.
I'm going to read the statement, and we're going to have Chris, our producer, pick which one of you argues the pro and which one of you argues the con.
Fair enough.
Is that fair?
Sounds
That's
good.
kind of like leaving it to chance with our producer.
That's
isn't it?
fine.
That's a plug, Chris. It's a good thing. So here it is. A quote from a Canadian politician. Housing isn't a primary federal responsibility. Not something that we have directly carried out anyways. End quote. Do we know who said that? Any idea?
Between Trudeau and the Minister of Housing. One of them.
Yeah, it's got to be out. I'm going to go with Trudeau.
Final answer?
Yeah, let's go with Trudeau.
It was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau who said that. So,
Sounds about right.
Sounds about right. Again.
here is the question. Given the state of our housing crisis, should it be? Should housing, given the state of our national crisis, now become a federal primary responsibility? Chris, who will argue for it and who will argue against it? Okay, folks at home, Daniela Douglas, our Senior Vice President of Operations, will be arguing for it, in favor of it. And David Price, Director of Sales from SVN Rock Advisors, will be arguing against it. We're going to start the clock with Daniela. Chris, you give us a countdown. You get 60 seconds to argue why this is a good thing and why it should be, Daniela. 3, 2, 1, go.
The federal government controls majority of policies. They control immigration policy. They control mortgage interest. They control pretty much, the way how business is conducted in Canada. As such, is their responsibility to ensure that housing it's actually has been talked as being a top priority, but the speed of action that's been taken, it's not at par with the talk. So yes, they are responsible. They need, to change the policy. If that, includes reviewing the immigration policy, reviewing how, banks are, setting interest rates, reviewing all decisions, they are being made, they need, to step in and, to take that control to assist the situation. When you leave it at
3 seconds.
At provincial level, there is no alignment.
Thank you. And time. Dave, we're going to start with you to argue why it should not be a federal responsibility. And for the record, it is a provincial responsibility right now, housing, technically. So we're going to give you a minute to argue why it should not be a federal responsibility in 3, 2, 1, go.
I appreciate absolutely your stance on this, but I wholeheartedly disagree that should be the responsibility of the federal government. 100% on board that somebody should ultimately be responsible for it, because without a head and somebody that's spearheading it, you're going to get a half-hearted effort. Now, why I think, you can play flip the coin on this topic. Having the federal government with all of its bureaucracy and red tape and the inability to affect change where it matters is not going to be solved by putting them ultimately heading up that initiative. I actually think it should go at the other end of the scale and put the onus at the municipal level and put that the developer, those that can actually impact the build and the units, should be heavily involved in that decision making.
And time. Guys, that was great. 2 very, very, very great points. And this is a topic that's a hotbed discussion, because I think we can all agree here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and across our nation, housing, the shortage of it, the need for it, and the care of it is a very, very real issue, and one upon which the next election may actually be won over. So Thank you both for being amazing guests. We really, we've run out of time, unfortunately. We loved having you here again, David Price from SVN Rock Advisors, and the one and the only Daniela Douglas from Holt Meadow Group. Thank you very much, guys, for being here on the Above the Line podcast, where tradition meets innovation. This was episode 2, The New Blueprint. Until next time, we'll see you all again. Bye for now.
Thank you.